into my arms, embracing you confuse me, but I just want to hold. I want to feel some fire in case I'm wrong before it's gone. 'Cause yeah, the signs are fast, but I just hope you won't just break me, because I want to find some quality before you're gone, before it's gone. So take some time, babe, and walk away. I found your heart's contact some way, 'cause I don't have to try, babe, 'cause time will say when it brings us back again. So this feels.
Yes! That's right. I don't know what's right. But I know what's wrong, and that is huge corporations like Apple using slave labour to build their products for white people. But we're not talking about that today, are we? We're talking about features of IDEs. So for this lesson, you're going to need your notes, obviously. It might be worth your while having Pycharm open as well, because then we can explore some of the different features of the IDE. For Pycharm is one example of an IDE. We'll look at what an IDE actually is, we'll look at some of the different features, and then we'll have a discussion on how those features can help you become a better programmer, or just help you find problems within your code. Does that sound good? First of all, let me apologise for that music. I didn't realise there was going to be lyrics in it. I mean, I used a different website to the one that I normally use, and it just had like a here's some free music. Hit the play button and it'll play a whole bunch of stuff. That's why we got those like low quality inspirational music things, and then there was some stuff with lyrics, and that's so sorry about that. Okay. Right, okay, so this still falls under the same category as translators and facilities of programming languages. Obviously, we're not looking directly at the programming language here. We're looking at the means by which we create them. So, without further ado, look, I've got my awesome laser pointer thing. Without further ado, let's. I say without further ado, and then I spend ages wiggling this around, but there's only 10 people watching, 12 people watching now. It's almost as if no one cares about my subject. But hey, welcome to those of you that do. So these are the objectives. We're going to be looking at these. These are all components of an IDE. Now, you guys, I get the impression that some of you guys and girls and MPALs will use Python, or rather you'll use Pycharm, and in your mind what's happening is I am using Pycharm because that is the way that I create my programs. I'm writing a Pycharm program, and rather than separating the language from the application, you lump it all together, because that's how a lot of school kids are sort of conditioned to think, but they're different things. Okay, Pycharm is merely a tool or a collection of tools through which we can create Python programs, because you can create Python programs in any text editor. Yeah, you can write them. You can write them in Notepad. You can write them in, I don't know, Atom. You can even write them on the command line as you go. But Pycharm sort of like pulls it all together. However, that's another reason why I think a lot of you had some issues when you were installing stuff, because just you don't have to tell me, but just maybe at home to yourself, raise your hand if, when you were installing the stuff at home, you installed Pycharm without installing Python and then didn't understand why your programs weren't working. Okay, you don't have to tell me in the chat. You don't have to out yourself. But if that was you, just maybe raise your hand. It's because it's understandable, right? That's because Python is the interpreter, the programming language that has to be installed separately from Pycharm, which is just the means by which we actually write these programs. I hope what I'm saying sort of like makes sense to you guys. Feel free to shout up if it doesn't. So. In this session, we'll be looking at what an editor is, what error diagnostics are, and what the runtime environment is. Now, these generally are features of any decent IDE, and so Pycharm has an editor, it has error diagnostics, and it has a runtime environment. So we'll look at what those things are. And you'll be able to explain what they are, and also explain how they make things easier. And maybe I'll teach you a little bit of programming at the end, just so that we can sort of use it in context. So question time here. Here's your tier 2 vocabulary. Yeah, you know I love that stuff. What does the word integrated mean? Someone tell me, what does the word integrated mean? If I have a integrated development environment, or maybe an integrated graphics card, or even if I say that I have integrated myself into the local community, because it's a word that can be used not necessarily just in a computing context. What does the word integrated mean? Built-in is a good way of putting it. Yeah, that's not too bad. To mix into, sort of, but it's a yeah, okay. I'll give you that. I'll give you that. It's sort of like if you join. If something is joined together so that it becomes part of the whole, it is integrated. Okay. Those of you familiar with sci-fi action movies or Vietnam films will probably have seen weapons which are an assault rifle with an integrated grenade launcher. It has a built-in grenade launcher. Note that at the end of Aliens, Ripley takes a M4A1 pulse rifle and straps it with duct tape to a flamethrower. The flamethrower is not integrated, although because it's joined together, it functions as part of the same weapon. But you guys won't have seen Aliens because it's an 18-rated movie. So there you go. That was a silly reference to use. But yeah, so integrated, built-in is probably the best way of describing it. All right. Yes, nade out. Cool. Okay, so let's. I think I've got some notes for you here. I've already told you what IDE stands for, but I want you to sort of try and remember what it stands for. I've mentioned it a couple of times. Can anyone remember what IDE stands for? Or can anyone do a quick Google search and find out what IDE stands for and just drop it into the chat there, just to make sure that we're all on our toes, we're all paying attention, and everything is wonderful. And while you're thinking about that, integrated development environment is correct. what is the IDE that we use for Python development. You can also specify any other IDEs that you might have used. Integrated something I just got here. That'll do. And the final question, what were those shapes on the first slide of the presentation about memory? Yeah, you thought you'd escaped that. You thought you'd got away from that. But no, here's me including stuff way, way ahead of you. Pycharm is an IDE. Yes, Notepad++ is not an IDE, although it does have some features which are usually included in IDE. So we'll look at exactly what Notepad++ is in a second. There was a red cross. There was a red cross. Can you remember where it was? Can you remember what any of the other shapes were? Blue square. I think there was a... Yeah, was the square blue? There was a cross, triangle, circle, and a square. That's right. There was a triangle. Triangle was bottom left. Circle was top left. Cross was bottom right, and the square was top right. I mean, you guys did pretty well for remembering that. Maybe I'll put that question on an upcoming next year's PPE or something like that. Anyway, so let's just go back to what who was it? I think it might have been Josh that said Notepad++ was a. I thought you delivered bread on a Thursday, Tommy. Okay. By the way, get yourselves down to Aldi because they are selling £15 churros makers. So there you go. So Notepad++, it is just an editor. Okay, you can type your code in, but that's all you can do. You can type your code in, and you can. It has like syntax highlighting and stuff like that, but it is still just an editor. When you run your code, what it's actually doing is just opening your web browser if you're making a website, for instance. Okay. Okay. So Notepad++ is an example of a good editor. I mean, it's a full-featured editor, but it is just an editor. IDLE is an example of an IDE. In fact, the I, the D, and the E in IDLE stand for Integrated Development Environment. Jupyter sounds familiar. That is one that I have not used. Let's just do a quick check. Jupyter. Project Jupyter is a non-profit. Blah 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 blah. I mean, I'm not familiar with Jupyter, but it looks like Jupyter is potentially. It does look fairly IDE-ish. It looks like the Jupyter company. Project Jupyter's name is referenced to 3 core programming languages supported by Jupyter, which are Julia, Python, and R. Also homage to Galileo's notebooks, blah blah blah. So it looks like Jupyter Lab might be the Jupyter looks more at this point like a I'm gonna say yes, I think it is, but don't quote me on that one. It does look like it's got all the features of a of an IDE. Cool. Okay, so and hello, Amy. I've just seen you there. And goodbye, Tommy. So yes, Cool. So what is next on my slide? So integrated basically means all in one. It's all built in. It's all merged together into one glorious whole. A development environment is a place where development occurs. Okay, I mean, an IDE, get more likes on the stream because then you learn better. Yep, sure. So a development environment it's literally, I mean, it doesn't mean environment as in the place where you are sitting. It means the environment in your computer whereby you have all of this stuff. I mean, in the past, before we had IDEs, you would have a separate editor, a separate compiler, separate runtime environment. In fact, there's a lot of people that still program in that way, but they have things as like spaced out around the around their window. With Pycharm, you have everything all together, and that is where you do all. I mean, you don't need to use a separate program to do any of your development work, right? Sure, you might need to use, if you're making a game, you might need to use a separate program to create the graphics and stuff like that, but that's not really part of the program development, you know. So an IDE is a single program which brings together all of the things that you need to make a program or a project which consists of multiple programs. Okay? It's got everything integrated into it, yes. If you've got Pycharm fired up, you might want to just have a look at that and follow along. If not, here's a picture of Pycharm. Right? We've got on the left hand side here, we've got a project browser that allows you to see all of the files that you have in your project. Now, when we've been creating programs, we created a GCSE project, right? And into that project went all of the files. What you'd normally do is you'd have a separate project file for each project that you were working on. So you can see here, this is my GCSE computer science project. You can see I've got a graphics folder in there, and I've got all of these different Python programs in there as well. You can move files around, you can drag and drop, just like if it was the your file browser on Windows. Okay, so when you hold down the Windows key and press E, and it pops up the files on your computer, you can drag and drop those files around. You can drag and drop files directly into whatever folder in your project browser on your IDE. Okay, you can access parts of your system which are not part of the project to copy and paste files and stuff like that. Okay, so the project browser is a pretty useful part of any IDE. Do I need to watch previous videos? Not necessarily. I mean, this is sort of like the fourth part in the features of programming languages video, but this is sort of standalone. It doesn't follow on from the previous stuff. Over here we have the editor. The editor is where you actually type your code. There are lots and lots of features built into the editor which you may take for granted, which are there to make it better, or rather make it easier for us to write code which works first time. I mean, you never end up writing code that works first time, but you get closer to writing code that works first time with a decent editor because it has various features. Can anyone suggest to me? I mean, there's a number of features just by looking at this picture here, but just focusing on the editor, can anyone tell me some of the features of the editor that might make it easier for you to write functional code? Automatic indentation is one example, yes. And automatic indentation is a massive help for Python because it's the code blocks are defined by indentation. Other programming languages, indentation doesn't matter, but it helps to make your code more readable. So having automatic indentation is a massive help when you're writing the program. Right, error reporting, someone has mentioned down there, that is not actually part of the editor. But that is part of the IDE that makes things easier to see what's going on. It's not actually part of the editor. That's more part of the error reporting functions of the IDE. Autocomplete. Yes. If you have a variable that you've already defined, call it, I don't know, number of dogs with hats. That's a long thing to type out, but you don't want to. If you shorten that to NDH, that doesn't really mean much, right? It might be easier to type NDH, but it makes it more difficult for you to understand what's going on in your code. So you want to keep that variable number of dogs with hats, yeah. But when you're typing, in fact, why don't I just show you this as an example here? Let's pull up my my Pycharm. Let's create a new file, new Python file, and let's call it examples. Okay, so let's create this variable, number of hats with dogs. Number of hats with dogs? No, number of dogs with hats. I've zoomed in way too much there. Okay, number of dogs with hats. Number of dogs with hate. That should be 0. Number of dogs with hats. Let's say there's 478 dogs with hats. Okay, there's our variable. Brilliant, right? If I want to use that variable again, yeah, when I start typing out, I don't know. Let's say if I go print. That you can see I've just typed in, and okay, you can't see it for some reason. My tooltips are not appearing on the stream, but rest assured, in fact, if you follow along with this, you should see the tooltip. Okay, I have a tooltip here. It says number of dogs with hat. If I just press the tab key, it's automatically filled that in. Okay. In fact, it required fewer key presses to type in that full number of dogs with hats using autocomplete than it would have done if I had reduced the variable name to NDH. Okay. Yep. I apologise for saying number of hats with dogs. Okay, so that's there's just one example. Other things that people have said, the red squiggly lines where something doesn't make sense. Yeah, that's kind of like the spell checker in Microsoft Word or any other word processor. But obviously, that's not telling you there's a spelling mistake. That's telling you there's a syntax error. Okay, someone explain to me what a syntax error is. What is a syntax error? And while you're explaining that, yes, Ben, automatic completion of speech marks. When you open quotes, you need to close those quotes. Another thing as well is when you've got brackets. You open some brackets, or even when your cursor is next to some brackets. Let me just pull up my Pycharm again. Here I've got some brackets. You can see my cursor is next to this bracket here, and you can see it's highlighted this bracket here to show that they are a match. If I included some extra brackets in there, you can see instantly which brackets match with which brackets. Okay, so there's the auto completion of quotes and brackets. There is another example of these good features in the editor. An error that actually causes the program to fail. Yeah, so a syntax error is where the computer literally does not understand what you have typed in. Okay, the logic errors, that's where the computer understands what you're telling it to do, and it does exactly what you tell it to do, but what you've told it to do is maybe not what you actually wanted it to do. So you don't get an error in the program, but you do get unexpected output. So syntax error is where the computer literally does not understand what's going on. The compiler can, sorry, not the compiler, the editor in your IDE can pick up on those syntax errors. Okay, it can tell when there's a missing colon. In fact, let's do it again. Here we go. Pull up the Pycharm again. Let's create a function. Def give hat to dog. Print. Now he got hat. And you'll notice I've got a little squiggly red line here. That is the editor saying, "Oi, what you doing?" If I run this program now, you can see I get that syntax error. It's pointing at that bit. Yeah, it's saying, "Where is that colon?" Okay, in fact, if you hover over it, on the right hand side there's this bit here. Again, you can't see tooltips on yours, but when you get these red bars at the side, if you hover over them, it gives you an indication as to what the error is. It says here colon expected, so if I type in that colon, boom. Okay, now what's the difference though between the red squiggly line that we just had? When I didn't have that colon there, we had a red squiggly line, but as soon as I put the colon in there, I get this yellow squiggly line. What's the difference between the red squiggly line and the yellow squiggly line? To answer that question there, why doesn't it add a colon if there isn't one at the end of the function? Because it's not the job of the IDE to write your code for you, okay? And also, it might be that it looks like there should be a colon there, but in fact there shouldn't, because what you're actually writing is some weird code which is sort of like, non-standard or something like that. It should always be down to the programmer to correct those mistakes. Okay, the IDE is not going to correct those mistakes for you. The IDE is going to point out, "Oi, that might be a mistake there," so that you can then go back and fix it. Okay, red means that it's incorrect. Yes, yellow means it's bad coding practice. Well, sort of. Generally speaking, a red line is an error and a yellow line is a warning. Now, warnings are there to say, well, your code's going to run, but there might be a few things that you can do to fix it. Most frequently, in Pycharm at least, the warnings that you will get will be a PEP8 code formatting issue. It says here, expected 2 blank lines, found 1. Now here's another cool feature of the IDE. I could add that extra line in there and then the yellow line goes away, but if I have loads of those things, if I press Ctrl-Alt-L, it automatically formats my code according to the style guidelines, so that's useful. Okay, so let's just go back to what I had here. Is there a green squiggly line? No, there is a green squiggly line as well. I think the green squiggly line is supposed to tell you that there's a typo, so that's actually searching for like literal spelling mistakes. You can see here recentering. I've spelt recentering wrong. It should be RE. Should it be RE? I don't know. How do you spell recentering? Should that E be in there? But yeah, anyway, the green squiggly line, that's like literal spelling errors. And for the most part, I mean, you can turn any of these things on and off as well. So cool. So we have mentioned automatic indentation, we've mentioned automatic tab completion of the variables, and we have mentioned the little squiggly lines. Are there any other things that the editor does that help us write readable and working code? because I can think, oh, someone mentioned line numbers as well. That's very useful for working out where your errors occur. So yeah, line numbers are good. Yes, color coding. That is generally known as syntax highlighting. Okay, have a look at my code down here. You can see keywords like import, class, def. They are highlighted in orange. The integer values here are highlighted in blue. The function name here, the class function, is a cerise color there, and then there's comments are in grey, strings are in green. This sort of thing is very, very useful. Okay. Yeah, there are certain words like self if you're creating classes which will autofill. Sometimes I'm pretty sure a sixth form. What are you trying to say, Alex? Are you saying my code is sloppy? No, I wrote this code because Ollie was trying to get this program to work. And his wasn't working properly, and so I rewrote it from scratch to do the same thing, but writing it in such a way that he could easily understand it. So there we go. Yes, they are similar because they're doing the same thing. Difference was that I still don't know if he ever managed to fix the issue. To be honest, I suspect what he was doing was using the wrong trigonometric function, but the way that he coded it meant that it was difficult to pull the bits out. It needed a ground up rewrite. Anyway. Yes, so we've mentioned the syntax highlighting. That obviously, because the editor is where you spend most of your time when you're writing programs, you'll find that the editor is the place where most of the useful stuff exists. There's another cool thing as well, which the editor allows you to do. I'm just going to write a whole bunch of random nonsense here. Because you may find that you end up with functions that have a whole bunch of stuff in them, and you're looking at the lines above them and the lines below them. Let's say this is important. Importante. So we're looking at the lines above, we're looking at the lines below, and we've got this function in the middle. Any code block in Pycharm, you can use these widgets at the side to roll it up. Okay, so you can see there, the whole function is contained inside this this rolled up block here, and we can tell that because of the ellipsis on the end here, and the plus there. If I click on the plus, it unrolls it so I can see the full function. That occurs with functions, it occurs with try, except blocks, it occurs with loops. Anytime there's a code block, the editor will allow you to roll the code up so that it's just out of the way, so that you can focus on the bits that you are concentrating on at any given time. Okay? Are we kind of clear on the different features of the editor that make things good? Make things useful and helpful. Okay. Now, there are some teachers that I'm aware of who think that teaching people to program using Pycharm off the bat is a bad idea because they learn bad habits like tab completion. I would argue that it's a worse idea to get them typing it all out without those features, because they'll end up with more syntax errors. They'll end up shortening their variable names because they can't be bothered to type them all out and stuff like that. I mean, it's a debate. I mean, you know, there's some, what can I say? Some people are just wrong. So what do we got here? The other things that so I mentioned the project browser. I've mentioned the editor. The program output down here. Most IDEs will have some sort of program output. And that's fine for text-based output, but if you've got a program which is drawing graphics on the screen and stuff like that, you might not get much output down there. However, when you're developing your programs, you will almost certainly have debug output that gets printed down here. And then you have what's known as the runtime environment. Now, not all programs have a runtime environment. Not all programming languages, sorry. A runtime environment is the place where the program is run, kind of like a sandbox, sort of. So if you have an interpreted language like Python, the runtime environment is that interpreter that runs all of the stuff. If you've got Java, in fact, when you install Java, it is called the JRE, the Java Runtime Environment. Okay, so the runtime environment is like the place where the stuff is run, and sometimes the IDE will have its own runtime environment built in, and that's why sometimes you get a different output in your IDE than you would do if you were just running it on the command line. Some of you that were using coloured text in your text adventures, if you're running on Windows, will probably have noticed that you got the coloured text in when you ran it in Pycharm, but you didn't get the coloured text when you ran it in a command line. Okay, a window for like Turtle or something where it shows what's happening. Yeah, so the thing to bear in mind, I mean, I've used the window here to sort of show a representation of the runtime environment, but it doesn't just mean, oh, here's your window, because the runtime environment, when you get program output down here, your stuff is still running in the runtime environment. Okay, so I put that up there so I've got a visual representation of what it is, but when you run your code, it's like the sandbox within which your code is being run. So for an interpreted language, the runtime environment is the interpreter, right? For a compiled language, do they have their own runtime environment? It would depend on whatever IDE you're using. Sometimes you might have, for instance, a runtime environment set up. Okay, so here's an example. Let's say I am developing a video game which is going to be run on a PlayStation 4. Okay, I'm not using a PlayStation 4 to create that game. I'm using a PC, right? But in order to sort of build the game that's going to run, in order to build the program that's going to run on that, I need to have a virtual environment set up which is identical, or as identical as possible, to the final hardware that it's going to run on. Okay, so when I run that program, it's not running on my PC hardware specifically, it's running on the runtime environment, which is emulating the functionality of the PlayStation 4. Does that make sense? It's kind of like a sandbox where your code is run. That's really what the runtime environment is. Does that make sense to everybody? Just say yes or no. Do you like my song? Yes, that makes sense. Good. Yes, good. Smith the Sense Maker. That's me. That's what they call me. Smith the Needs a Shave is what I should be called. Okay, so not really. Okay, so let's see if I can define this in another way. Do I have a slide on this? I actually hold fire on that because I do have a slide on this coming up. All right. I'm not going to bother with that slide. However, this one, we've mentioned this already, but in case you didn't note it down, code completion. So pressing tab automatically completes the function names, the variable names, all of that stuff. Inline error checking, we've mentioned there. Syntax highlighting we mentioned, and bracket matching we mentioned those things as well. I'm assuming I don't have to go over any of that stuff. I'm going to move on. Feel free to protest in the comments, and then I'll go back if necessary. Here's something that we haven't yet mentioned, is the error diagnostics. Error diagnostics are very, very useful indeed. A lot of people will see the red traceback and they will panic and they will say, oh God, I'm a failure at life. But what they should be thinking is, okay, cool, my program doesn't work. Let's see if I can fix it. Okay, and that is what the error diagnostics are there for. So they tell you what error has occurred and they tell you where. Why is that a useful thing to know? Why is it useful to know what went wrong and where it went wrong? I mean, this sounds like a silly question, right? So what do you think the answer is? I just put Tiger Balm on my arm, and now my arm feels cold. Sure, it tells you where the error is and what it is. That's simple enough. But why is that useful? I mean, if someone points out where you went wrong, so you know what you're looking for. Yeah, so you can go back and fix it. Okay. Now, the way that the traceback works in Pycharm is it will tell you what went wrong, and it will also trace back through the function calls, because the line where the error occurred is not necessarily the line that you have to fix. Okay, how many of you, for instance, have had an error message that says there's a line, I don't know, error on line 12, but the error is actually not on line 12, it's on the previous line where you forgot to close a bracket. In fact, maybe I can just pull up a quick example of that here. So I run that now. Okay, I get a traceback. It says here, error on line 4, syntax error, invalid syntax. And so you go to line 4 and you're like, but there's nothing wrong with that. Look, print, that's correct. I've opened the bracket. Oops. I've opened the bracket. I've closed the bracket. I've opened the quote. I've closed the quote. Why? There's no error there. Well, the problem is that the error is not on that line. The error is on the previous line. Okay, tracebacks are useful, but they are not foolproof. Okay, so sometimes you need to look at the previous lines. I mean, this is a very simple example. There we go. I fixed the error. This is a very simple example, but if you've got more complex situations, you might have a function that calls another function, and that function calls another function, and somewhere along the line, one of your variables is all messed up. Yeah? You need to be able to work out where that error is. So looking at the traceback here, we can see there's an invalid rect assignment, and that happened on line 19. Okay, but that was called, I mean, that line 19, that was called from line 50 here, and that line 50 was called from line 83. So we've got sort of like 3 things that we can check. Okay. The advice that I always give everyone when it comes to these sorts of errors, when you get an error and you fix that error, make a note of what the error was and what you did to fix it. Because then when you find another error that's similar, you'll think, okay, well, that's how I fixed it that time. Is there something similar that I can go back and fix the next time? Okay, actually writing down those error messages can be very, very useful. Okay, right, so Any questions on error diagnostics? I mean, in my mind, that seems pretty straightforward. So, runtime environments. Interpreted languages like Python and some compiled languages, most notably Java, do not produce executable files. Okay, so they run within a sandbox. You all heard the term sandbox before, right? You've probably heard it in reference to video games like Grand Theft Auto is often described as a sandbox game. The idea is that within that environment you can do whatever you want. It's the same thing here, right? The sandbox that your program runs in has access to everything within the sandbox, but nothing outside the sandbox. Okay? So, a program which understands the instructions to be executed and makes them work for the machine that it's installed on. Okay? In many ways, it's like an emulator, right? I can write code on my Linux machine, which is designed to run on a Windows machine. And remember when I said that code won't run on the machine that it's if I compiled it on Linux, it won't run on Windows. Well, that's true, but if I compiled it on Linux using a Windows runtime environment, then it will run within that runtime environment and it will run on Windows. It won't run on Linux outside the runtime environment. Does that make sense, what I'm saying there? So it's sort of like a fenced off region where the code can run with some specific features which are intended to allow it to run on the final hardware that it's designed for. Make sense? Cool. Of mouse. I've got another slide. Here we are. Wait, there's more. Oh, look! It's the exact example that I used before. Who knew? Who knew I'd use that example again? If I'm developing a PS4 game, I need a PS4 to run it. But I can use the IDE to set up a runtime environment which mimics the hardware setup of the PS4. Okay? So, as another example, second example, if we're developing programs to be run on a 32-bit platform, but I have a 64-bit development machine, I can set up a 32-bit runtime environment so that I can test that software on the 32-bit sandbox. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah, are you getting a better idea for what the runtime environment is all about? I'm aware of the time, and there's looks like we've got about 10 minutes, 10 minutes till the end here. So I might not be able to get all of the stuff done that I wanted to get done. Might have to do some more another time. But does that make sense in terms of the runtime environment? If it does, just have a quick think about this. Why do you think the runtime environment is beneficial? Why is it a good thing? Why is it useful to have that function of an IDE? Yeah, it allows you to experiment with things. That's a good way of putting it. It allows you to try out a lot of different configurations without having to set up that specific hardware or develop on that specific hardware all the time. Okay, and like think about if you're developing a program for a system which doesn't have any form of like input, like you're making a program to run on an embedded system, for instance, right? You're not going to develop on that embedded system, are you? You're going to develop on your computer, and then you are going to set up the sandbox runtime environment so you can test it out. Anyone that's ever done any... I don't know. Has any of you ever experimented with the Android SDK, developing apps for Android? There's an Android emulator in there where you run when you run the programs, it runs within. You get this little picture of a phone on your screen, and you can you can experiment with that. Okay, so being able to set up multiple different configurations, and the other thing as well is there might be different flavors, if you like, of the hardware. Sure, we might be developing for the PS4, but there might be, I don't know, the PS4 Ultra, if that's a thing, the PS4 Magic Edition. Okay, and so you might want to set up different runtime environments to mimic the different like hardware configurations that for your end target release candidate. There's some jargon for you. Now there's one more thing. The last thing that I was going to do was show you how to use Python to write to external files, but I think I might save that for next time. There was one thing though that I do want to show you, and I think I've shown you this before, but it is a very important part of IDEs and how they can help us in the development process. And I didn't mention it in my presentation there, and that is the debugger. And I've mentioned this before because I mentioned these things. Can anyone remember what these red dots are called? If I put a red dot in there. Breakpoints, yes, well remembered. I'm going to get rid of half this code here. Bear with me, I'm just writing some terrible code here. Right, ignore really what's going on here. I just want to show you how these breakpoints work and what the debugger is. So I'm added this breakpoint, right? When I run the program, this should tell me that, oh look, this okay, my program's not actually this. I didn't intend for it to not work like this. Oh, I know why. Well, I know how to fix the problem, but I'm gonna use this as an example of debuggers. Right, so I've added a breakpoint here. When I run the program in debug mode, what's going to happen is it's going to run all the way up to the point where it hits this breakpoint, and then it's going to pause. Okay, you can run it in debug mode by clicking on the little bug icon up here. Right, and when I run it, you can see it has run down here, and now it has stopped. It has paused there. I can see the output. I should be able to see the output in the console there. You can see it's printed out 478, it's done all of that stuff, right? And the debugger, it tells us all of the variables that currently exist within our program. You can see I've got a variable, number of dogs with hats, 478. Now what I'd intended my program to do was print out 0 dogs wearing hat spotted, 1 dog wearing hat spotted, 2 dogs wearing hat spotted, right? But it didn't work that way. If we have a look at my output, it's just put 478 dogs wearing hats all the time, and I need to work out why that is not working. And so I can step through my code line by line. This little icon here, step into my code, allows you to step line by line through the code, and you can see how the variables are changing. So I click on that here. You can see I now have a new variable here, I equals 0. Any variable names which are written in red mean that that variable value has not changed since the last time we stepped. Okay, so now I run this code here. I can see that I is 0, number of dogs with hats is 478. When I step over that code, I can go to my console, 478 dogs wearing hats spotted. Well, most of you have probably already spotted where the error occurs in my program, so feel free to just comment in the chat there what error I have made with my program if you spot it. We're back up to the top of the loop here. I'm going to step through again. I can see now I has increased to 1. Right? So remember, I wanted my program to say 0 dogs with hats spotted, 1 dogs with hats spotted, 2 dogs with hats spotted. And what it's actually doing, it seems to be just printing out 478 dogs with hats spotted over and over and over again. But we can see here that variable number of dogs with hats is still 478. That hasn't changed, but when I step through again, I has now changed to 2. Can someone suggest a potential fix for my program that will allow me to get this working as intended? I'll keep on stepping through here. I is now 3. Number of dogs with hats is still 478. Look, you can see it hasn't changed. It's still red. What do I need to change? I mean, this line seems to be fine. You can also see in the debug what the current value of I is when you're stepping through your loop there. Feel free to chime in a couple of minutes of me stepping through this. I will tell you what the answer is, but I'm confident that you guys should be able to see what the error is. Look, every time I go through, it's printing out 478 dogs wearing hats spotted. I don't want it to print out 478. I want it to print out whatever number we're currently on. I'm wondering if my chat has crashed because no one seems to have typed in anything for ages. Okay, Tommy's back. Cool. Does it have something to do with the S? Right. Okay. So, in this syntax that I've used here, that %I means insert an integer into the string at this point, and then it will look at the end to find out what gets inserted. And the integer that I want it to insert is number of dogs with hats. Okay. So I'll keep on stepping through. Alex has the answer there. I need to put I after the percent instead of number of dogs with hats. So if I put I in there, instead of inserting 478, it's going to insert whatever the current value of I is. Okay. Now I don't actually think that will update right now. Yeah, okay, so it's worth noting, although when I pause the program using this breakpoints, when I've edited the code there, the version of the program that you run is the version that it was before you started debugging. So in order to get this, to try it out working, I've got to go stop the program, and then I've got to run it again. And now if I step through, we should be able to see it's printing out the variables as expected. Okay, so I don't have a specific assignment for you at the moment. What I'd like you to do is finish off that worksheet if you haven't already finished it, and also when you are writing your programs, either for any programming challenges that I've set or for the challenges on Check.io. Well done to Ollie, by the way, for totally smashing through that. He's like light years ahead of everyone else. Everyone else needs to really get some catching up done there. But when you're trying to work out what's wrong with your programs, try using the debug, the breakpoint debug, to go through your programs to get them working. Okay, so that's that. that's almost an hour exactly in terms of the actual time that we spent. When do we have to submit that worksheet? As soon as it's done. Ideally, I'd like to mark it this weekend. So if you could maybe hand it in on Saturday, that would be cool. And then I can do some stuff on Sunday. A tutor group Teams meeting. Wow, there's so much. Sounds so much terrible stuff. Do I have any A-level slides I can send you for revision on this specific subject or on different subjects? I'll tell you what. Ask me in the Discord, because then I'll be able to just point you in the right direction. How do you open the debugger? First of all, you've got to have a breakpoint in your program. When you run the program, instead of clicking on the little run icon there, you click on the debug icon. Or apparently you can press Shift F9 and that will run the debugger. Okay. Are we good? Was that a good lesson? I mean, I thought it was going to be short, but it wasn't. Hopefully you guys learnt some stuff there and you got some decent notes, and hopefully all of this stuff makes more sense. And now when people say, oh, what IDE do you use? You can reply Pycharm, and if they say, oh, I use Notepad++, you can immediately slap them in the face with breathtaking force and say, no, that is only an editor. So there we go. Yeah, good, Tommy. I'm glad you got loads out of that. Nice one. You can go back and rewatch it. Okay, thanks very much, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. I think the weather's supposed to be pretty nice, so do an outdoor thing. Go outdoors. #GoOutdoors.com. No, that's I don't support that company. I mean, I have no feelings either way. That I'm going to have a shave. It's well overdue. Thank you, and good night.